everyone. This is a Leadership with Heart podcast, and this is Heather Young, your host. Employee experience is powered by emotions. Managers and or leaders within organizations get to choose which emotions they unleash from within the people they lead. Leaders, meaning supervisors or above in an organization, drive much of the positive or negative emotions by their actions or inactions, their words, or what they fail to say. When a manager chooses their words and their actions carefully, they exhibit great emotional intelligence. These managers are often thought of as leaders who care, or as I like to call them, leaders with heart. This special brand of leader drives engagement and loyalty simply by being themselves. Are these leaders perfect? Absolutely not. It is in their awareness and sharing of some of their imperfections that we realize their brilliance. In this podcast, I ask you to see yourself in the stories my guests tell about times when they were not the best versions of themselves, but how they used their hearts to guide them to a place of deeper connection with their teams and heightened leadership prowess. Enjoy. Hi, everybody. This is Heather with the Leadership with Heart podcast, and I'm super excited today to have Sarah Bernhardt on the podcast today. So I invited her on. She just has a very special way about her. I met her in a volunteer role, and she also is in the HR field. But I met her in a volunteer role, and I just love her way. She has a certain way about connecting with people and listening in it with her ears and her heart and all of that. And so I knew that she'd be a special treat for those that would be listening on the show today. So welcome, Sarah.
Thank you.
So where are you right now in your leadership journey?
Yeah, so today I work for Greystone Technologies, a Colorado managed service provider, IT outsource provider. In my current role, I'm responsible for our HR function, but also our end user training function. So we're building an end user training service line. So I get to work with Dan, our technical training manager, on that. And then additionally, I'm a little bit involved in marketing. So our creative strategist is also in my team. So we have kind of a unique blend of voices in our group, but it's a really wonderful group.
Oh, that's awesome. I think that's wonderful that you get to touch that much of the organization. Most HR folks, they have to stay inside their swim lanes. And the fact that you have those sides there, I think would make you super effective on the people strategy. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm incredibly grateful to be in the spot that I am. It's not, like you said, it's not often that we get to kind of play outside of HR, but we're a smaller organization, and so kind of by virtue of Peter and Jesse saying, "Hey, what else do you want to do?" I've been able to do more. I'm lucky.
So one of the things I love to ask people is, what is it that drives you to lead? So that, most of us are just, there's just something that's there in our history, our past, in our past relationships that makes it so that we want to lead others. What is that thing that drives you to lead? I
really love building things and making a difference and kind of leaving a legacy, if that makes sense. The one of the coolest things about coming to Greystone was that I got to be the first. Greystone's been in business since 2001, but I'm the first HR person we've ever had, right? And so that was a huge draw for me, just because I've, been to the organization where there's 100 years of history, and I've been coming in on the back end of that with all that legacy stuff, and I loved the idea that I'd be able to be a part of building that for us. So honestly, just building things and then helping other people build their things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, great. Well, because then you actually see there's a legacy, or see there's something that's there after you've done your work. And there's something to be said for that, because there's a lot of times where you don't see that necessarily. Like there may be a transaction that you don't see the fruits of it.
Well, and it's even just being part of helping somebody build their career. The folks that I work with now, I know they're not going to be here forever. And we talk about that, and that's okay. But I want to help them, get to their next place too, even though I don't want it to be tomorrow, but I want to help them in their journey and help them get to their next spot,
I love that. I think that is a long-term outlook to have versus, in the work that I do on the employee loyalty space, it is obviously focused on keeping people as long as we can and trying to give leaders and tool them with the things they need to do in order to keep them as long as you can. But you're still right that it's not very likely they're going to stay a lifetime as it was before, with pensions and all that kind of thing. Right? The state of work right now is just not the same. But I love, have you read Reid Hoffman's The Alliance?
No, but you're the second person, and I don't know, you're the second person to have mentioned that book to me, so it needs to be on my reading list.
Yeah, well, I love it. It was like I actually did put it inside my book because I thought that I love the idea that it talks about really this idea of a tour of duty, and we know that people may stay 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, and in the beginning, if we kind of get that right on the table to begin with, and then we work inside the parameters of what they want, and we see if we can make it mix with what we need as an organization, then it all works together, and we don't feel sour if they have to go. And like you said, you can help them then get to their next destination and just feel like, again, you've all accomplished something in the meantime. So yeah, it's great. I highly recommend it to anyone, to be honest, leader in or outside of HR. It's great.
Awesome.
So one of the things your team right now is how big? It's a smaller team right now, you said, right?
It is, yeah. So there's 4 of us all, including me.
Okay. So with you, how do you think your people would say your leadership style is? So how would they describe your leadership style?
I think that they describe it as collaborative, right? We create and have an environment where we talk about all the things, not just the good things. And so sometimes as a leader, that's hard, right? Because I'm a human, emotional person too. And so if somebody will give me constructive feedback, or somebody will tell me they're just not feeling it, or somebody will, say, oh gosh, my engagement is suffering. And I take that personally because I care deeply about what we're doing. But even when I'm not my best self in responding to that, sometimes I feel like we have an environment where we can bring our whole person to work, and where, even when stuff's not going well, we can talk about it.
That's good. Well, I think obviously it helps in a smaller environment, but I do think that very large organizations, the leaders and the team leaders and stuff within those organizations can create that same environment where, we're bringing the whole person, we're handling the humanness that exists from like the good, the bad, and the indifferent, and knowing that it's okay to be that way. So I love that, just you having that faith.
Well, and it's pretty, when you think about when I think about myself, if things are going great at home, my tolerance level for baloney at work is significantly higher, right? If I'm struggling at home and my kid's sick and my husband's struggling and life is just tougher at home, then it becomes tougher to put on that game face at work. So having balance between those things is pretty big.
That's interesting, yeah. And it's true. You stated it so, I guess, straightforwardly. I like that, because most people will say those kind of things, but they don't really connect the dots the way you just did, in a very simple way, which is, the mindset that we're in when we enter either one of those environments, depending on what the other environment, the opposite of that, has in store for us. And it could be from day to day. So yeah, we need to be open with our people to kind of share, not overshare, but share enough. Right? Because there's a fine line there, and from HR, but
for sure,
being more open, I guess, with ourselves, our teams is great. That's great. Okay, so can you tell my listeners a time when maybe you weren't, as enlightened you are now, and you weren't your best self, you weren't really proud of yourself as a leader? Can you give us a specific example of an instance where you weren't that best person?
Well, yeah, I think it kind of relates back to what I was just talking about, in the sense that, when you are kind of fostering an environment where it's okay to be yourself, your human self at work, sometimes you're going to have, sometimes you're going to hear feedback that you don't want to hear. And I once had a team member who said, who was like, yeah, I'm just not feeling it, and I don't know why. And my response should have been something like, okay, well, I need to understand that more deeply. Can you go away and think about it, and then we'll talk about it again? And in reality, my response was emotional and kind of snappy. And I was like, well, I can't do anything with that, so we're going to talk again on Thursday, So just kind of coming from a place of frustration with the inability to do anything with that. And that's a trend that I've noticed in myself. I really want I'm really invested in the folks that I'm working with, and I really want them to be okay and happy and successful and growing and feeling good about stuff. And when they're not, occasionally I take it personally, and I'm not my best self in my response to that information coming out.
Mm. Well, I mean, it says a lot. People having the show, I always tell people this is not about perfection, it's about continuous improvement. And I do highlight leaders that tend to be higher on the emotional quotient scale. And I know that about them, so that's why they're on the show. But none of us are perfect. None of us are perfect. I've written a book. I'm about to write the second book, and believe me, I've got a long way to go, right? So we're just all trying to get by and do the best we can and keep people at the center of this process,
Right.
That. So what happens when, let's say you're on a huge project and people are kind of running in different directions and you feel maybe a little disconnected from the team? What do you do to reconnect with your team in a deeper way?
Yeah, it honestly, for me, it depends on the person and the situation, because there are certain people that I'll just say, hey, let's walk over to Safeway and grab a coffee. I need to get some, milk duds for my candy dish, and we'll just take a walk and catch up in that way. And I have other people who, will connect best over a happy hour, right? So I'll plan a happy hour. I have other people who, don't use alcohol, so we'll go get a Starbucks coffee. For me, a big thing, and this may be me, or it may be my team, or it may be both, just kind of getting out of our environment, switching things up is big, and kind of allowing some of that tension and other pressure to shake off. Just kind of moving physically away from it can help, at least for me.
That's a good one, moving physically away, because even I think about just leadership aside, or leading myself. Sometimes when I feel like I'm in a place where I'm knee deep in the tension or knee deep in the stress, just getting out and going for a walk is super helpful to get away from what you say, moving physically away from all of the environment that's creating it. So I think that's beautiful. Even when I'm doing coaching for executive leaders, I'll tell them, sometimes you just have to break away for 5 to 10 minutes and go look at the trees. So you can just come back with a refreshed look about life, because it's so easy to
I can see that. Yeah. Just looking, even they say, look away from your computer for 20 seconds,
Yes, there's something to be said for that. I'm gonna have to ponder that some more, because I think there's some good stuff there. Okay, so one of the things I forgot to ask you, but let's just go back real fast. When you were at that place where you were, where your team member told you that he or she wasn't feeling it, and you kind of snapped, and then you kind of came back out. What did you do how do you get past that? Because as you know, we all as leaders have that one thing that keeps rearing its head. So that's one of them that's doing it for you. What do you do each time to kind of come out of that place to a place that, you feel like, okay, now I'm on the other side of this?
Yeah. For me, like I said, I care a lot about what we're doing, and I'm personally involved. And sometimes what that means is that, I'm not as disconnected emotionally as I should be. I think that a certain amount of emotional distance is healthy, and so that's what I need to do, is just take a little bit of time. I apologize when I realize that I've behaved that way. I say, hey, listen, I'm sorry that I wasn't my best version of myself in that moment. I hope you can accept my apology. I act this way because I care, or I said that because I care, and it didn't come out that way, and I apologize. And then I set a time to talk about it later once I've had some time to disconnect from it a little bit emotionally, and to just get out of my heart and into my brain about it, if that makes sense, a little bit more.
Interesting. It's so funny, because obviously the title of this podcast is Leading with Heart. But there were all these, it really is kind of psychological games we have to play with ourselves as leaders to allow our hearts to shine through in an effective way. And so sometimes distance yourself, to remove some of the negative emotion that might be loaded in there is the best way for you to reveal that heart, like you just were able to do, where you said, I'm sorry, I wasn't the best version. And, that's just not who I am. I care. And that does show heart. And then it was like, now let's separate for a little bit so that we can come back with a fresh view of what just took place. And I think that shows there's a certain amount of courage to not address it right then. There's a certain amount of compassion to not address it right then, to kind of come back to it, because you want to make sure you're leaving them feeling validated and heard. And they won't feel that way if you just keep going down that road in a negative path, right?
Right. Yeah. Sometimes you just got to press pause.
So for the stuff that you do in just the people management space and what you do for the people strategy space at Greystone, do you ever look at, for example, the training? Do you ever have, are you pressured to look at return on investment? Or what are you getting for the money you're putting in for developing the people? Do you ever have that focus where you have to do that?
I just feel like that's kind of a natural focus for me, as I see that as something that's important globally to the organization. So, it's something that I very naturally, I think, consider and think about and work hard to understand with the things that I'm putting into place or evaluating for the company.
That's interesting. Yeah, and I know obviously a lot of times we in organizations we're looking at ROI in such a tunnel vision way that sometimes we're not seeing the big picture and the benefits that it's giving to us that may be intangible for now, but in the end, like for example, increased customer satisfaction, customer retention, like things like that, where it may not be a dollar amount that we can associate it on the ROI side, but we can see some other evidence that it's working, right?
Yeah, and I think honestly, one of the things that's been really beneficial for me from being able to work or being able to kind of be a part of these different service lines in my role has just been the ability to kind of look at things from a more global perspective and understand them more operationally also, because I think back to, growing up in HR, I recruited, I think one year we filled like 175 positions, and our applicant tracking system was like a series of Outlook email inbox folders, right? And so when I look at these modern applicant tracking systems and just the amount of time that they save and just the kind of, I don't know, to me, some of those things are just a no-brainer, but I don't know. I think I just went on a tangent there.
Oh, that's okay. It's all about it's where we stand in the shoes that we stand in. And so our views are on that. And again, because you get the holistic view, you get to go down and sing all of those things. So, for a leader that maybe you might even coach someone internally for this, but for a leader that might be struggling in their leadership, they're at a crossroads, they just might be having a tough time. What might be some pearls of wisdom you would leave? And maybe it could be someone listening in right now, and they may need to hear the message you're going to deliver. What might that message be?
Well, I don't know. I just feel like never losing empathy. And this is something I struggle with. Obviously I've struggled with in all kinds of different relationships, but just, I don't know, for me, remembering to kind of place myself in the other person's shoes and understand what they might be thinking and feeling that might be driving their behavior is really powerful.
So never losing empathy, remembering, putting yourself in the other person's shoes and what is it doing to their behavior. So I'm curious to know, what do you mean about that? So give us an example, I guess.
Yeah, well, so I think that oftentimes when the people that we work with are behaving in ways that we find abrasive or challenging, or, just I think so much behavior is kind of driven by fear. Like when we think of toxic behavior in the workplace, so much of it is fear-based. So, controlling information, playing politics, all these kind of different behaviors really are just people wanting to be successful and wanting to look good in the organization. I think, sometimes we just don't know how to do it, or we've only seen it done in certain ways. And so, we behave in these manners that end up being negative, when in reality, I just feel like a lot of negative workplace behavior is fear-based. And so I try and put myself in the shoes of the other person and say, gosh, why are they acting this way? What could be driving this behavior? And really thinking about their intention, because I think that at least where I work, for the most part, even when somebody's driving me nuts, I can look at them and understand that their heart is in the right place. And that goes a long way for me. So even if they're going about it in a way that I find abrasive, or a way that I wouldn't necessarily go about it myself, generally speaking, I can look at them and trust their intent.
I would think like that your ability to trust their intent is because of a history that you have with them that shows, or kind of that proves, or that's a piece of evidence that shows you that their heart's usually in the right place when you come and dig out of it, right?
Right.
And so that's a good one. I like that.
But even when somebody's behaving badly, typically, I think it's kind of like the human condition. I think almost everybody thinks they're the good guy in any situation, right? So if you can look at it from that perspective, even if somebody's acting out, typically it's because, for example, they're not feeling heard, or they think something's being handled incorrectly, or, almost everybody sees themselves as the good guy, I think.
That's a good point. I think I needed to hear that. Sometimes, there's a message that rings to our, and hopefully those who are listening, this rings true to a certain extent, and maybe helps us all deep dive into our own leadership. But I know that there are times even just leading at home, and being able to say, I'm not just right. I'm not I don't have to be right now. I put myself in that person's shoes and figuring out, what's happening. And I consider myself strong in this area, but, sometimes, and also, the empathy parts, sometimes, like you said earlier, you have to have a little bit of distance, or else you take on too much, and then you're just emotionally drained over the other person's, whatever's happening with the other person. You put yourself in their shoes. So there's that, you almost have to disconnect to a certain extent, not get too far into it, but you have to show them that you care. It's kind of the biggest thing.
Right. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I know those who are listening have taken away quite a bit, and I really appreciate you being on this show. And for those who are listening, if you did like what you heard today, and of course all the other shows, please do like us wherever you listen. It could be on iTunes or wherever, Stitcher. When you do that, the algorithms help to put this at the top of the list for leadership podcasts, and then other people can hear this content as well. So I appreciate you, and thank you for listening to the Leadership with Heart podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership with Heart podcast. You can grab the show notes by visiting customerfanatics.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter.